Welcome, everybody. The intent today is to talk about your test results. We actually have four, I believe it was four people who submitted their test results to GMAT Club and myself to offer themselves up as opportunities to look at the test results and see what we can learn from this. So if you're one of those people and you're here and you recognize your test results and you want to talk about it more, hey, now is the time to do it. Start throwing things out in the chat and let me know how my analysis resonates with you. I'll be very interested to see that. So when we are analyzing our test results, what are we looking for? Many people start with a score. And many people start with the right versus wrong and the content areas. That's not where you start. Start with your timing. Now, I am not going to do that today. Today, the first thing I'm going to look at is the score because I am trying to be realistic about what people do and what people are looking for. And yes, obviously, you cannot look at this without going, what was the score? Like, everybody's going to do that. But I want to emphasize, look at your timing in great detail as soon as you can. And then, as well, the issue thing about the scores is, do you look at the scores or do you look at the percentiles? That is something that a lot of people still get very, very sidetracked on. And there's still, in my opinion, a lot of misconceptions, maybe even to the level of misinformation about what is the most important aspect that you're getting from your score reports. Now, we'll go in just the end result here. What do you want? In quant and data insights, you want low spikes. You want a few questions where you realize that your timing goes along and then zoop, drops way down. Because you need to be looking at some problems in quant and data insights and saying, no, definitely, at the very least, not right now. Maybe I have time at the end. Maybe this would be one of the three that I come back to. But I would not be doing this right now. With your scores. With your scores, your quant, verbal, and data insights sub-scores are what you want. The percentiles for those sub-scores are pointless. I see a lot of people talk about percentiles. We're not talking about percentiles in terms of the scores. But when we look at the question types, that's where the percentiles can be useful because those can give you somewhat of an indication of where you're getting hampered by missing lower difficulty rated questions. And again, just want to call out here, everybody, if you have the opportunity, make sure that you like and subscribe to this. Get notifications on when other types of videos about this will be coming up. This would be an immensely useful tool for you in your GMAT prep. Continuing to move forward here. Person number one. I'd be interested to see if there are any reactions in the chat. If anything stands out to you. If you are person number one and you'd like to say so, feel free to chime in with that as well. When you look at the score, yeah, there's one thing that definitely stands out. And it is this 90. Gotta love that. I mean, that's one of those with no notes, literally perfect. You definitely want to maintain that. And so you look at that and you would say, all right, this is one thing where I don't want to become complacent. And just be aware of that. But yeah. Ishan, verbal. Verbal is definitely that opportunity there. And what you'd want to know is if you go back, are we seeing high spikes in verbal? You want to see verbal where you're moving along, and then something shoots up. because you want to see that initial time increase for your reading comprehension passages. And so that's one thing that we're looking at here. We say, okay, verbal is a little bit lower than where we'd want to be. Let's see if we can find out about why that's happening. What about we get high scores on quant and verbal rather than data insights? Kashish, my question to you is, what do you mean by high score? You have to keep in mind that when you look at these, look at the means for these numbers. Your mean for quant is 78. Your mean for verbal is 79. Your mean for DI is 5 points lower, approximately. Four points lower, call it. And so data insights actually normally does trend a little bit lower than quant and verbal. That's normal. In fact, ultimately, and I said this in another seminar a couple of weeks ago, your goal for primarily is to get an 85 quant, 85 verbal, 80 data insights. Like that is the initial ideal. And so we'd be looking at this and saying, all right, these are the scores. Now let's take a look and let's see what we find out in the rest of the score report. Now, you can see that this is data insights. You see this list of question types down here. So we're looking at the data insights section. What, if anything, stands out to you? And while we're doing this, I hope you don't mind me taking the occasional sip of coffee or tea. It just helps when I'm going through and talking so much during the day. To follow up more to your comment, because she's high scores on quant and verbal rather than data insights. If your data insights is substantially lower, it is quite likely that there is a timing issue there. That one particular question type is soaking up so much time. What we notice here is the non-math related, which actually is not surprising. We're seeing that a lower verbal subscore coordinated with a lower percentile of the non-math related problems. And that's where we're looking, that's where we're going to be focused. So in data insights, you'd be looking at saying, okay, so non-math related. I would start with the official guide there, and I would go to the chapters on the two-part questions and the data sufficiency questions, and just make a list of questions that do not present any mathematics at all. They do not have any numbers in the slightest. Each one of the little sub-chapters in the official guide is broken into an easier, medium, and harder subsection. And right now, what I've been noticing is that you have a higher proportion of the non-math related problems towards the end of each subsection. And so you start with looking at probably the last 10 to 15 easier, the last 10 to 15 medium, and the last 10 to 15 harder. And you're going to trend more non-math related problems there in the official guide based on what I'm seeing in the most recent books here. Rally of correct answers for at least 60% of the total questions in the section. So, Ishan, that's interesting. So what happens when your fifth question in the section is an absolute beast? Are you willing to let go of that rally of correct answers? That's what we want to ask in advance. When are we willing to let go? When we look at the timing, so you do that later? All right. So when we're looking at the timing, those two Did you come back to those two? Is that why those two are so high? And then you would want to look at these three. You want to look here, here, really mainly those two. And even if it's wrong, assuming that you did not come back to question number 3. If you came back to question number 3 and like that was one you came back to and spent more time on, that's one issue. But you'd want this and this to be a lot lower. Because as you may be noticing here, look at this overall trend. At the beginning, just take a look and see like how many of the questions sit very high above that average. And then at the end, how many sit below. I would bet money that those last 3 are, I would say that 2 of those last 3 are probably ones that you could have gotten if we sacrifice 2 of the earlier ones. And that would be ultimately your goal. Take a look at the 3rd question and find out what question type it was. Take a look at the 7th question, find out what question type that one was, and try to figure out, look at other questions that had those similar typings and say, all right, how do I know to not get sucked into those? How do I know to look at these and say, not today? At the very least, not right now. There's a trend we're going to notice, I think, in several of these, this idea of you're having a lot of things pop up where you have a lot of time at the beginning and you're running out of time at the end. That makes things really difficult. And in fact, let's compare that to the quantitative section where literally perfect. You literally cannot do better than this on the quantitative section. And look at this person's timing. And look and see, do you notice that at the end of the quant section, this person still has enough time to reserve for several questions at the end? That's what we want to see. But now we look at verbal. We have 2 things that stand out. And you can use these classifications. The mind is under stress for the first 10 minutes, and then it eases down and starts acclimatizing. That is an interesting realization. Ishan, have you thought about ways to get your mind acclimated before you start the test? Since you have the opportunity to choose the section order of the test, one of the things that I tell practically everyone that I work with is have a warm-up question set. 5 questions in whatever section you plan to start with that you know felt very challenging when you first saw them, but you now know how to solve them. And before you go into the test center or before you sit down at your desk to take the test online, take a moment and just take those 5 problems and resolve them. Get your mind moving in this universe before you dive into the actual test. You're absolutely right. That first question can be a shock. That first question can just hit you, slap you upside the head and go, whoa, oh my God, I have to be in this now. And the more we can prepare ourselves so that we don't have that initial first question shock, the better off we'll be. This person, you're actually seeing some interesting data here where you can look at practice tests and you can realize that, okay, wait a second. These are categorizations that would show up in my practice tests. And I want to look at those. And I want to look at all of those. Not just the ones that I got wrong, but also the ones that I got right, and find out what's happening with these problems that are labeled in this way. And you would again be wondering about the timing. And the question I would have for this person is, where are the reading comprehension passages? Because as I'm looking at this, PowerPoint keeps wanting to move forward here, and I don't like that. I would hope that's the first question in a reading comprehension passage. And I would hope that that's the first question in a reading comprehension passage. But as I'm looking in here and in here, where are my other reading comprehension passages? Because the timing doesn't reveal that, and it really should. What you want to see is you want to see a fairly level line for all critical reasoning problems and a big spike for the first reading comprehension, and then valleys for the next two reading comprehension questions. And so this is what I would be asking if this were my test results on the verbal. How do I level off critical reasoning? And then how do I take advantage of a thorough, good initial read of the reading comprehension passage and let that carry me through the multiple questions on the passage in such a way that my second, third, maybe fourth question on each passage has a lot lower amount of time. Like if we're just looking at the timing, this right here is actually really nice. Now, assuming that's a reading comprehension passage, and if this is a reading comprehension passage, that's actually pretty nice in terms of timing. Now, we want to get accuracy. I mean, there's no getting past the fact that we missed the 4 questions there if that's the reading comprehension passage. But you want that initial spike, and then the next 2 to 3 questions are a lot lower. But again, I'd be wondering, where are the other reading comprehension passages in this verbal section, because the timing isn't revealing that. And you want your timing to reflect that nature of the test. So if I were this person, I'd be saying, all right, non-math related data insights problems. Those are easiest to find and identify for 2-part questions and data sufficiency questions, so start there. Then I'd be asking on the verbal section, how do I adjust my timing for critical reasoning versus reading comprehension to improve my process on those? Those are the 2 questions that I'd be asking. And again, just notice we're still seeing this theme of a lot of time up front in the beginning and not having a lot of time at the end. You notice this is almost a complete mirror image where the vast majority of the questions at the beginning are above the average, and the vast majority after the beginning are below, after the halfway point, are below the average. Again, if you're having other comments, concerns, if you're seeing things that you want to address in these score reports and you'd like to chime in, feel free to go ahead and do that. All right. Question number 2. What do we notice? If you have anything in the chat that you notice and you'd like to point out, feel free to go ahead and do so. So would I suggest reviewing the 12th question later? Right here for question number 12? Like if we're looking at this one, this is a problem where I would say, if this is a very long reading comprehension passage, you get one of these. Hopefully not up to 5 minutes long, but honestly, that can happen. 3 minutes to read the very long passage, and the first question is really, really tough, so it takes you about 2 minutes. But then you have this sort of coast down at the end here. But what I would ask is, and you may be able to remember that. You may remember there's just one passage that you just read it and you were like, oh my God, what language is this even in? I don't even understand any of this passage. And try to figure out what core sort of genre of passage that was. Are we looking at a science-based? Are we looking at something that was about history, about sociology, geopolitics? Who knows? Whatever it was. Can you remember a passage because this is probably, hopefully, a reading comprehension passage that just really hurt you. And try to seek out other passages like that, or subscribe to high-end magazines that focus on those same types of content, and just get yourself acclimated to reading that type of thing. Yeah. And so this would be one I'd say, would I recommend reviewing it later? Again, you have to keep in mind that you're not going to see the actual question. Like, you get your official score report and you don't see the actual question. So you cannot review the actual question itself. But you may be able to remember, okay, what passage right in the middle of the section was just absolutely brutal. And you can try to find passages that are kind of like that one. Work at DI to get it at a level similar to the others. See, again, data insights is actually supposed to trend a few points lower. It's not a bad thing if data insights is trending a little bit lower. I would say that this person, you're looking at someone who has got very solid fundamentals across the board. What they now need to ask is, where can they get a few specialties? Perhaps there is a quant content area where they can just say, all right, if I see exponents or if I see quadratics, I am done. I'm beautiful. I love those. Get a few specialties. Maybe in the verbal, you say, okay, if I see a find the assumption critical reasoning question or an inference critical reasoning question, I am so practiced at those. I love those. Those are fantastic. I would actually recommend trying to lift quant and verbal first, because you have to keep in mind that the vast majority, if not every data insights question you see, it may not be every, but the vast majority of data insights questions that you see are testing content that could be dropped into a quantitative problem or could be dropped right into a verbal problem. And so this is sort of an aspect of rising tide lifts all boats here. If you become a little bit stronger in quant and verbal, that's going to lift data insights on itself a little bit. This person, apparently, it looks like they took data insights first. That's why it's popping up first. This is interesting because this is actually now an inverse of the other person. You're starting to see some verbal strengths that are carrying through to data insights. That's why the non-math related is substantially higher. And so I would be asking, what math related data insights can I polish on here in particular? The other thing for me, as I'm looking at this is not universal. This is not an absolute. But graphs and tables problems, those trend a little faster, in my opinion, than the other question types on data insights. And so I'd be looking at graphs and tables and thinking, how can I just make myself a little bit more efficient there? If you look at the timing, a lot of spikes here. And in fact, what you'd want to ask is you'd look at questions 11, 5, even though you got it right, 16, and 19, and you'd be asking, I cannot do that. Whatever happened on those particular questions, I cannot have that level of spikes in data insights. It needs to be the opposite, actually. You need to have spikes low. And so you'd be asking, what question types were those? And how do I recognize to burn those? Christian is right on. You look at this and you would say, all right, I need to look at whatever question types those were. And I need to practice my recognition of when I see that question type, should I spend time on it at all? Because something is happening on number 12, 14, 15, and 20. Now, 20, they were just out of time. 20, they just barely got an answer and confirmed it before the test just shut down. but you're asking, where do I have some other opportunities? On the quant side, this one is interesting because you obviously have very strong showing in value order factors, which tends to be stuff like exponents, powers of 10, divisibility questions. But the others are all pretty consistent. And so you'd be looking here more about timing. And there's something really interesting in the timing for this person's quant section. I'd be interested to see what people notice. This one intrigues me because if you look at the end of this, one thing that would be really, really difficult. Yeah, a lot of below 2-minute answers and a lot of correct below 2-minute answers. So what you would be looking for is you'd be looking at the question types that correspond to these numbers, and you would be asking, am I this good? Or was some of this luck? And it could be either way. This person, it is possible to get just a raft of questions at a certain portion in the quantitative section where just for whatever reason, you've got 4 or 5 in a row or like 6 in a row where all of them just land right in the content areas where you're most comfortable. You're like, this is great, this is great, this is great, this is great. And so if you look and see saying, all right, so this is, you'd be so happy about this. But what I would find interesting here, this could be someone just speaking with tons of softballs. And that would be what we need to ask. This person works better under pressure. But that's the things in it. I don't think this person was under pressure. And again, I don't know. But when I see something like this, did you come back to those two? With that much of a spike compared to everything else, literally, those are the only two that are even close to being above time. Everything else is below 3 minutes. So I don't think this person was under time pressure. I think they had time to come back to 11 and 12 and spend a lot of time on those. And so what I would be wondering here is you actually look at 2, 5, 8, 10. You look at those. All right, hopefully I'm back now. I think there was a little bit of a glitch in my connection. I saw the screen went blank for a moment. If you can hear me again, if you can see me again, please let me know in the chat. Say, yes, we can see you. Yes, we can hear you. But what I was saying is, I don't think this person was under pressure. I think that this person, thank you, Zenith. You need to look at 2, you need to look at 4, you need to look at 8, and you need to look at 10. Go back to all the practice test questions that look like those. So you can use the content designations that you see in the question lists for both the official test results and your practice test results. You can find those and you can sort of reverse engineer what content areas those were. And then you find those content areas and you go back to the easy and medium questions in those content areas. Because with that level of performance at the end, at least 2, maybe all 4 of those were actually questions that had a surprisingly low difficulty rating. And you just maybe had a very unlucky day in that regard, where you're looking and saying, I missed 4, and it just so happened that almost all of the 4 that I missed. And again, I'm ignoring number 12, where I spent 6 minutes on. Number 12 was probably just an absolute nightmare. So just don't even worry about that. Somewhere though, and the ones where you're spending a moderate amount of time on, and you're still getting them wrong in comparison to all the others that you're getting right, you're looking to say, where am I? Make sure that I can answer all of the easy and all of the medium for those types of questions. When checking answer, is it better to start from the first ones, isn't it? Considering the under 2 minutes, probably you didn't even check those first answers. Christian, yeah, so that's the whole issue. This person, I wonder if this person actually at the moment wasn't even aware that they had struggled on those 4 questions at the beginning. That they're solving things really quickly and they're getting trapped in some way. That there is some question type or a couple of question types that they just tend to get trapped on and they're not realizing it. Like my initial thought might be something like quadratics or absolute values or inequalities, where you got quadratics, absolute values, and inequalities. Those tend to run with negative number traps. And maybe this person is just not assessing negative number opportunities. That could be an example of the kind of thing where this person's getting trapped and it's just not even on their radar that that's an issue for them. Because yeah, you'd want to come back and check those, but I don't think you even knew that you needed to. And so this is why I'd say find whatever you can find out about these problems from the question lists. Analyze your practice tests and all the problems that have the same categorizations, and then look at everything that you can find about those content areas and make sure you can do all the easy and mediums, because make sure that you're not getting trapped on the lower rated ones. I mean, I think this one speaks for itself. Someone is absolutely demolishing critical reasoning, but getting demolished by reading comp. And you've got to ask, wow, that is such a massive split. And it is actually quite likely that this person is not aware that most critical reasoning questions want a very different mindset than most reading comprehension questions. Most reading comprehension questions are about inferences. Not what do I expect happen next? What do I think? Not what would be interesting to discuss, but what is definitively proven using just the text that I have. Whereas critical reasoning, you find the assumption, you strengthen, you weaken, you explain the questions, you evaluate an argument questions. A lot of those reward a little bit of an outside the box mentality. What has this person not brought up yet that would be interesting to discuss? Talk about new interesting stuff versus when do I want to just stick to exactly the text as given. And yeah, Christian, you're absolutely right. Like this person, went to the wrong time. It's like, I think this is undoubtedly someone who had just 10 minutes left at the end of the quant section. And so you've got to ask, like, where am I getting trapped? Because we can obviously get through it very reasonably. When we're looking at verbal, when we're looking at the timing here, this is actually interesting because this brings up some other aspect here. was this and this reading comprehension passages? Because if those were both reading comprehension passages, then there's something interesting here where you're seeing that you get one right, then you get the next two wrong. You get two right, but then one wrong. This is one where like I remember seeing this and being very surprised, because I would expect with only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wrong on the verbal. With only 5 wrong on the verbal, I would expect a score that is higher than 81. And so we're actually seeing, I think, a similar pattern in both quant and verbal. We're seeing this issue of somewhere, somehow, this person is getting trapped. Maybe they're rushing at the beginning and they don't realize it, or moving faster than they need to. I don't know. But you've got to go back and you've got to look and you've got to figure out where you're getting trapped, which again means fundamentally do the easy and medium questions first. Preferentially look at those and make sure that you can answer all of those very, very readily. Mayank, hello. And again, Zenith, Christian, Mayank, I hope that I'm doing well with pronunciations. If I'm not, please know that it's certainly not intentional. And I hope that I'm doing a good job, though. So we're seeing a lot of the same things on quant and verbal for this person, where I'm wondering, they seem to be getting trapped on lower rated questions and they're not realizing it. And so you'd want to go back and look at easy, medium, and see if you can do to shore that up. Question number 3. Again, very balanced score. Quant and verbal around the same level. Data insights around 4 to 5 point lower. That's about right. That fits the overall trend of the test. When we start looking into a little bit more of the details here, this is a person who needs to look at word problems. You look at that pure contexts versus real contexts, and you see such a strong split there. Yeah, you're going to look at word problems, and you're going to be looking at word problems that are based in fractions, percents, ratios, probably rate questions, and weighted averages as well. Rates and weighted averages are actually ratios technically. And a lot of people I know don't really think of them that way. But you're probably looking at fractions, percents, ratios. You're probably also looking at rate questions, and you're probably also looking at weighted average questions. All of those tend to have story elements, and that's probably what's sitting in that ratio, rate series, percents idea. And so that's what you'd be looking at for this person. And again, this is one where I'm looking at this and I'm going, you only missed 3. If you only miss 3, so again, I didn't mean to do that. If you only miss 3, I would expect a little bit higher than 82. I would expect 85, maybe 86, maybe 87. And so what is happening on these 3? And again, look at this. You only missed 3, and you've got such a strong split that just drove down the real context just massively. Somehow, we're again looking at someone who has something that's trapping them and they don't realize it. And so they're getting caught on lower rated questions and they aren't aware that they're getting caught. And you've got to find those content areas, and you've got to go back and practice all the easy and the mediums, prioritize those. Because those 3, 2 of those 3, if not all 3 of those, must have been a massively lower difficulty level. Now, this person actually sent out the part of what they gave me was actually the question breakdowns here. And so we're looking at here, all 3 of them were real. All 3 of them were word problems. And considering the fact that it's a rates ratio percent, I would bet number 4 was a percent or ratio based problem. And I would bet that 10 and 12, maybe both, were statistics questions. Possibly a probability or combinatorics, because probability and combinatorics live in this counting sets series prob stats category. But it would be unlikely to get 2 of those like that. And I would look and I would say statistics is the more likely culprit there. But again, I don't see your practice tests. And you'd have to go back and look, and you have to go back all of my real counting set series probability stats questions. When I look at those in my practice tests, is it living in a statistics idea or is it living in something else? On the verbal side, this is actually pretty even critical reasoning and reading comp. I'm seeing a big drop here with analysis critique, but honestly, that could just be because there was an outlier. So I'm not sure that that's much of a thing there. What I'm seeing with this person is so much time at the beginning on several questions. And you're fast on the other things. And so we need to ask, like, what's causing this timing spike? Number 2, 3, number 8, 2, 3, 8, and 15. And we look at 2, 3, 8, and 15. So this is what's interesting. 2 is critical reasoning problem. And you've got to ask, how can I level out critical reasoning a little bit? Because I think, yeah, that was the only critical reasoning problem that you spent over 3 minutes on. And so what this is telling you is that if you're spending a long time on critical reasoning, don't. Because you're fast enough elsewhere that you probably don't need that. 3 is reading comp. The first question in reading comprehension passage, that's good. 8 is reading comp. First question in reading comprehension, that's good. And then 15. Now, this is interesting. 8 is reading comp, and it was probably you had back-to-back. Look at this. That's back-to-back reading comprehension passages right there. And so what you might want to practice there for a little bit is actually forcing yourself to do back-to-back reading comp. And so if that happens on the test, and it's unlucky, I've seen somebody who actually got 3 back-to-back, and that is just mind-numbingly difficult to get 3 reading comprehension passages back-to-back. Even 2 back-to-back. That second one can be a bit of a beast. Now they got them all right, and so we look at the timing. We say, all right, I want to be ready for the back-to-back reading comp, but overall,